history as entertainment, and we also hope to talk about entertaining history. I'm Marris. I'm third year in the department here at Columbia, and I'm also one of the graduate coordinators for History in Action this year. So I'm just going to briefly introduce our panelists. Each of them is going to give 10 to 15 minute presentation, and then we'll open up for questions. So, Simon Schama is Columbia University professor of art and art history, and has taught at Cambridge, Oxford, Harvard, and the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, as well as lecturing widely on both sides of the Atlantic. His books have been translated into 15 languages and include The Embarrassment of Riches, an interpretation of Dutch culture in the Golden Age, Citizens, a chronicle of the French Revolution, The History of Britain trilogy, Rough Crossings, Britain, the Slaves and the American Revolution, and The Power of Art. In 1991, he published the twin novellas Dead Celebrities and Unwarranted Speculations. He has been an essayist and critic for The New Yorker since 1994, and his television work for the BBC and PBS as writer-presenter includes 2 films on Rembrandt, a 5-part series based on landscape and memory, award-winning Emmy-nominated A History of Britain, a film on Tolstoy, a 90-minute adaptation of the book Rough Crossings, the 8-part series The Power of Art, The American Future in History, and in 2014, The Story of the Jews. The Face of Britain, his 5-part series on the history of British portraiture, aired on the BBC in 2015 and coincided with the release of yet another new book. Dr. Mellissa is a producer on the TLC documentary series, Who Do You Think You Are? After receiving her PhD in African history at UCLA in 2009, she joined the historical research staff at Hoodoo in 2010 and has been producing the program for 5 years. Her research has been used on episodes featuring Rob Lowe, Rashida Jones, Christina Applegate, and many others. During her tenure on the series, she has traveled to Ireland, England, Latvia, and numerous U.S. cities, and now she manages research staff in Los Angeles full-time. Before entering the world of television, she completed the Fulbright Scholarship in Namibia, where she conducted her doctoral research on the history of the local township Komosdal during the apartheid era. Edda Black is an associate professor of history at Carnegie Mellon University. She is the author of Deep Roots, Rice Farmers in West Africa and the African Diaspora, and co-editor of Rice, Global Networks, and New Histories. She is currently writing a history of the Gullah Geechee, titled From First Dark to Day Clean, an epic history from Western Africa to Gullah Geechee. She is also currently collaborating with artist Jonathan Green to write and produce The Requiem for Rice, a lamentation for the repose of the souls of the dead who were enslaved and exploited on Low Country, South Carolina, and Georgia's rice plantations. This musical production for symphony orchestra, choir, and West African drummers and dancers will open in Charleston, South Carolina in 2017, and will both memorialize and celebrate the critical role enslaved Africans played in the economy of the U.S. South. And last but certainly not least, Rob Striem is a New York-based location manager for the film and television industry with over 35 feature film and episodic TV credits over the past 20 years. Rob was the location manager for both seasons of Steven Soderbergh's highly acclaimed Cinemax series, The Knick, which stars Clive Owen as a surgeon at a Manhattan hospital in the early 1900s. Rob has been a member of the Directors Guild of America since 2000, and he served on the directorial team for 2 Directors Guild Award-nominated directors this year, working again with Steven Soderbergh for The Knick, and with Tom McCarthy for Spotlight, which also recently was nominated for both Best Picture and Best Director, among other things, for this year's Academy Awards. So with that, I will hand over to Simon.
Thanks, Caroline. Well, it's wonderful to be here. It's wonderful to be in History in Action, because history should be constantly in action. One of the first things that my own Cambridge tutor told me half a century ago was to paraphrase Ian Forster's paraphrase from Rudyard Kipling, which ran as follows: what do they of history know who know only other historians? There's something they know the Kipling original. And I was really the beneficiary of dumb luck, really, have been for a long time, in that that particular tutor was a man called J.H. Clark, who was a visiting professor here, good friend of Dick Hofstadter, Garrett Mattingly, a lot of historians at Columbia who had narrative, powerful, propulsive narrative writing in their blood. But Jack was someone who did a bit of television, not very much, but he was someone for whom, well, his own PhD tutor had been G.M. Trevelyan, and because Trevelyan had a kind of lineal family connection with none other than Macaulay. So in some sense, even though Jack was from a very lower, sort of lower middle class, upper working class Leicester family, he had in his intellectual blood the sense in which public history, lay history, history written outside the academy, and scholarship were not only not mutually exclusive, they were indispensably mutually nourishing. And that wasn't necessarily a universal view in Cambridge. But he paid enormous amount of attention to the craft of narrative writing in this dismal ritual by which you read out your essay each week. A ghastly routine I followed when I was tutor, I have to say. But he would spend a long time on a particularly egregiously awful paragraph of mine, really. One of which, the greatest humiliation. Anybody work for Time magazine here? No. Okay. The worst thing that was said sounds exactly like a Time magazine. So I've always thought, actually, what you might call the entertainment side of history and the analytical side of history were they were absolutely mutually nourishing. And so did our father figure, Herodotus. Okay, Historia, I'm told by Greek scholars, is in the first instance means an inquiry, analytically, forensically, but also, of course, means storytelling. And Herodotus was not short of extraordinary narrative skills, which were meant to be written to be declaimed orally. Remember that. You've already bought a J.O., I'm sure, from orality to text. Very important if you're a historian to read that. If you think about Thucydides, for all the incredible intensity and analytical steel of those debates, which are through the book like a filament of exacting inquiry, the whole famous sequence of the Plague of Athens, could be a film script. I mean, it's absolutely astonishing. It's the first great account we have in Western writing of the hysteria of an epidemic and the disintegration of social norms. Had Ebola reached these shores, the text or reading would have been Thucydides' account of the Plague in Athens. Now, I'm going to show you a clip which in some ways is representative of the work I've been doing for 30 years. I realised I've not only been in academia for 50 years, but I made 50 programs and about 10 series, so grown old in this multitasking double life. I remember going to a conference, I don't know if you were there, in Boston, probably about 15 years ago, maybe even longer, called Telling the Story, that was meant to bring together academic historians. It was just around the time Ken Burns's great series on the Civil War was beginning to air with 13 million viewers. And it was supposed to bring together academics and filmmakers. And I remember basically it ended up as a kind of mutual nose-holding exercise, really. And the general notion was that, if you're a historian who has anything to do with academia, this automatically disqualified you from having the faintest pretension to be going anywhere near, except as an on-camera interviewee, which is a different story, and that's a story in which the director has complete control of what you're doing and so on. I wasn't interested in that at all. I actually wanted to learn. I understood, particularly when I took on the history of Britain, that it was an exacting craft, and it was a craft one wanted to learn. I didn't have, Walter Mitty pretensions, though now I should do, of directing. But I did want to know if I'd said to the guy who taught me, then it was Avid actually, before Final Cut Pro taught me editing and learned about lighting and so on. I wanted to know what to do if the director, dropped dead of a heart attack. He looked at me rather weird, with a leery expression, so I was plotting the very same possibility. And so I did sort of take on the task, but if you think about these seem sort of very esoteric and jazzy and not anything you would think about, they are not at all, things about lighting and so on of course are, and those need to be learned. The same is true with editing, but even I'd say actually editing in those days, and I began editing with actual film, with actual wonderful thing, first films I made on Rembrandt. But even those tasks are actually cognate with what you will do when you're writing a narrative which yields argument. Great television history, in particular, great television art history, is essentially, first and foremost, designed to plant the viewer mercilessly in their seat or couch, and then yield argument out of that. Ask the questions that arise out of the story, and that very often happens in the way you write, anyway, when it's not the formal exercise of a PhD dissertation. I suppose, so that was very much the task I set myself, as my colleagues all do. And then different kind of correlated tasks. I can't remember, I think that the BBC's motto, as founded by the relentlessly severe Lord Reith, was educate, enlighten, and entertain, and all those three E's were supposed to be forever fused together, and the best possible luck it is. But you have to, in the first place, be, the first thing you have to do, particularly when you're writing a script, is forget about any notion of simply handing a chapter or written word. Writing a script is a different exercise, not least because you should be writing to shot, or you should be thinking about the shots. And the shots will do things which you would describe verbally. It was a rainy day on July the 14th, it wasn't actually, on July the 14th, 1789, whatever. So you have to learn how to think visually, but you are in any case learning how to think, or you should be learning how to think visually in much of your written work. Same thing is true with the interplay of characters, with actual archivally documented dialogue, diaries, monologues, and so on. All those are the meat and potatoes of really good history documentary making. But you also have to learn how pace and, I would say, visual and dramatic hospitality. And what I'm going to show you is a clip which in some ways is not completely characteristic of what I do. It's the very first thing that appeared on screen for the story of the Jews. And the task there was that the television series, and indeed the book I read with it, but particularly the television series with PBS and the BBC, was that it should not simply be an echo chamber for Jews to talk about Jews to each other, but that actually it should invite as many people as possible to give people a sense in which Jewish experience, albeit extreme in terms of uprooting, dislocation, not to mention incineration and extermination, was to some extent a record of a much broader kind of human experience. So what I wanted to do, this is you always have arguments with your director, your producer. What I really wanted to do, actually I had in mind and we took a long time to really think about what we would do in the first 2 or 3 minutes before the actual story gets going. The actual series began after the title sequence, you'll see, with a crane shot of Freud's house as he's completing Moses and monotheism. And it was about Freud's rediscovery. In fact, he'd never left Moses alone. So it actually began rather late before going back to... I set down a very fierce rule for the story of the Jews: no backlit camels under any much better to have Freud. There was wonderful archive. It turned out he actually gave a broadcast on radio. So this is the bit before Freud, and I wanted to have a very expansive view of what the series would deliver. So I actually wanted a series of black and white images of Jews of every kind of shape and size, and particularly of colour. And we had a big long argument, and I accepted his view that this would look too precious in some sense. So we took street shots instead, as you'll see, and they all are. The clip is I think self-explanatory. So why don't we play it, Caroline? Now, how am I doing? Have I already exceeded my time?
I think we can spare you 2 minutes.
Okay, I've got 1 or 2 things to say about it after you play it. Thanks. Sound. I think we need to be a bit louder.
Yep.
This is a Jew.
Anyone hear it?
And so is this.
Okay.
This is a Jew. And this. And this. And so am I. So what, if anything, do we have in common? Not the colour of our skin. Not the languages we speak. The tunes we sing. The food we eat. Not our opinions. We're a fiercely argumentative lot. not even the way we pray, assuming we do. What ties us together is a story kept in our heads and hearts, a story of suffering and resilience, endurance, and creativity. It's the story that made me want to be an historian in the first place. For I understood when I was quite small that there were two special things about the Jews, that we'd endured for over 3,000 years despite everything that had been thrown at us, and that we had an extraordinarily dramatic story to tell. And somehow that these two things were connected, that we told our story to survive. We are our story.
I don't know if you can see or hear anything at all there, actually, but there's phantom shapes. The story of the Jews would have made great radio. It is so much a story about text. In fact, there is an incredibly epic history of Jewish art. That's not an oxymoron. But over and over again, beginning with what we have to say about the beginnings of the Bible, but above all, this extraordinary papyri of a Jewish mercenary garrison in Upper Egypt, now Fantini, the story arises out of the physical materiality of the text. Dead Sea Scrolls is another example, all the way through to the edition of the Talmud that was produced by survivors of the death camps in 1946 in Germany, in Heidelberg, which is pretty much where the series closes. I wanted something that actually folded an animation into the text and lifted in and out of it. There is she was incredibly kind about it. There is a great contemporary Israeli artist who works in New York, Knick, who's worked with calligraphy. She was above our budget, really. But I sort of pinched the notion of the animated life of letters and found myself a Torah scribe, and Torah scribes aren't that keen on working on television, but if you find a lapsed Torah scribe, which I did, you're in clover. And what's more, he had a cousin who was an animator, so you have to go for these kinds of things, and again, you subliminally plant the seeds of the kind of visual atmospheric that you want to create. That's probably enough to me, right? Is it? I would just say, all I do want to say is that I mostly work at the BBC. I watched a bit of the PBS. I made one freestanding PBS film based on Dead Certainties, but which is huge. Unlike the fiction that Dead Certainties was about the murder of George Hartman in Boston for the American experience. But we hire a lot of young history graduates as researchers. There comes a moment where they have to decide whether they're going on with their graduate work or whether they're going to become assistant producers and then sort of make their way in broadcasting, which is a very high-risk exercise altogether. But it is because of the hospitality of British media, and it is a more, despite the dominance of Channel 4 and BBC 2 and BBC 1, in terms of production, it's a more decentralized world than in the United States, where what you see on PBS is so dominated by a relatively small band of historical documentary makers. That's the way it is. I mean, if there's one thing wrong with PBS, it is its sense of monumentality, of actually having a big group of true tried and tested filmmakers. The problem is that those, being true tried and tested means they're getting on in years, as am I, and as is the audience. the audience are on their way to turning into exhibits in the natural mystery. I'll stop.
So I come from outside of the world of academia. I'm a location manager. I work on major motion pictures and television shows, mostly shot here in New York. And what that is essentially is I'm on the project from the very beginning when there's a director and a script. Sometimes there isn't even a script. That's another thing to explore. But we basically build a film or a television series from words on a page to complete work. So I see the project through up until the end of filming, and then when it enters into post-production, I move on generally. That involves working very closely with the production designer and the directors and producers, but production designer and director and I tend to have the most contact, and it's really establishing the visual aesthetic of the film through filming in practical locations, which is very prevalent today. And I guess the reason I'm here is because of my affiliation with Steven Soderbergh's dramatic series, The Knick, which airs on Cinemax, just completed its second season. It's the story of it's fictionalized, but it's very much based in historical events, and the characters are loosely based on real people. Clive Owen plays a surgeon in a New York hospital who's really brilliant and innovative and on the forefront of the innovation of new medicine at the turn of the 20th century. He's also a drug addict, and it's interesting how those two things play together. But the show also explores all of the themes that are pertinent to our society at that time, from the hospital is being integrated, much to the chagrin of most of its staff and administrators. But that is a powerful event that changes the face, of course, of the hospital and its purpose in its community. It also deals with, of course, medical innovations and the trial and error of new procedures as they fail and then are improved upon. And issues of corruption and class and technological advancement, and all the things that are public health issues, all of the things that are happening at that time are represented in the show. This, like other historical dramatic works, maybe more than most, is meticulously researched, the show, at every level. The art department has a researcher that is basically just pulling up anything from the time that's relevant, and so much of the visual quality of the show comes from that research. Almost everything about this show is drawn upon some reality. We have a full-time technical advisor, Dr. Stanley Burns, who is always around and also helps the writers develop stories. He's there basically to maintain the accuracy of the medical instruments that are used, the procedures, and many of the stories, like this season, there was a story of Thackeray determined to separate two conjoined twins that shared a liver. This is based on an actual medical historical event, among many other things in the show. The costumes, of course, are meticulously researched as well. So we can talk about that show all day, and I'm happy to. I think it's a fantastic experience, and historical research, as someone who's never studied history formally in the academic realm, I find myself having to perform the role of an amateur historian as I research locations, and accuracy is extremely important in terms of periods of architecture and design. We can talk specifically about that if we wish to. But I'm kind of going backwards, whereas I think the purpose of this conference largely is finding a place for history in as it applies to entertainment for the purpose of this panel. I'm sort of looking at my life in entertainment and the work that we do and thinking about how history is relevant to it, and where, without even perhaps considering it, history has come into play in the work that we do. Beginning with the question of what makes something historical, Caroline mentioned Spotlight earlier, which is another project that I've been privileged to work on. And this tells a story that's 15 years old, but it's incredibly powerful in our historic narrative. It's the story of the Spotlight team of Boston Globe reporters who broke the story of the Archdiocese sex abuse scandal in a town that, probably second only to Rome, is about as close to the closest to the Catholic Church of any other, at least in the United States, any other town, if not much of the world. And it was probably the most unlikely place for the story to break, but various circumstances, and most importantly, a committed team of journalists enabled that to happen. And the film, this is a film also that documents its history meticulously. This is not doesn't look to sensationalize the story in any way that's been done over and over again. No one wants to see that, I think, at this point. And Tom McCarthy was really dedicated to tell a story of legacy journalism and the city of Boston, and how this story revealed itself to the reporters who ultimately shared it with the world. So that being a 15-year-old piece of history, I think is equally relevant in terms of placing history in an entertainment context, entertainment in a historical context. Other examples, just since we're talking about Steven Soderbergh and the Knick, I did a film with him back in, I don't know, it was less than 10 years ago. It was a small film called The Girlfriend Experience, in which on a less than $2 million budget, we made a film about a high-priced prostitute. But less than that, more than that, it was less about that and more about, it was set during the week before the presidential election in 2008. And it was a time of economic despair for our nation. And here are these guys who are either have so much money they don't know what to do with, or they're just reaching for something in a world that is beyond their control in any other way, and they're spending ridiculous amounts of money on prostitutes. It's a time capsule. It's sprinkled with headlines and references to what's going on, to the point that it's almost so obscure that if you go out and look at this film now, it feels dated, even 7 or 8 years later. So that's another aspect of history, as I'm trying to find parameters within which to think about this, that's a moment in history that serves as a setting for the entire film. So I began looking at my entire body of work over 20 years and looking for ways in which history can play into what we do, or how films have handled history. It really depends on the film. Obviously, the inclination is to consider period movies, where we're telling stories that have taken place in the past. They all deal with the subject matter in different ways. And we as filmmakers deal with it inadvertently every day. Every time I try to shoot a scene in today's New York that takes place even a few years ago, I've got to deal with city bikes. I've got to deal with elements of today's New York that may not have been relevant before, even in the mundane, such as that. We deal with history every day. We don't necessarily think of it or call it history. We might, any pursuit of an accurate representation of the past is inherently a study in history. So we call it making things believable or making them real. But if you're representing historic events or historical context, you're essentially failing at that goal if you're not staying true to history. And therefore, the research and their technical advisors in so many different capacities based on the type of film you're making that will assist in that, or we find ourselves serving as those historians ourselves. Just looking at a wide range of films, I did Men in Black 3 in 2010. This is probably, it's on a list of its potential goals in aside from just getting completed. Being historically accurate is not necessary. You wouldn't think it would be at the top of the list. So what we find ourselves doing there is creating a version of history. We actually represented, there's time travel in that film. We go back to 1969. So inherently, we need to look at the past. We wanted to represent the first NASA space shuttle launch. And we actually took a trip down to Cape Canaveral and went to the top of the rocket launch and looked at it from every angle. But the truth of the matter is, going to the real place provided us with a contemporary version of what happened in 1969. So all of the technology, of course, is wrong. It's further advanced. So even if the lay of the land is correct, the details are incorrect. So we ultimately made a decision to forsake the exercise of bringing a company to Florida, and we built a section of the rocket launch on a soundstage that was very carefully researched. They have a museum, and their analysts and production designer studied the mechanics of the original space shuttle launch, and we created something on a soundstage that, for all the close-ups and the degree to which we saw it, was more real than anything we could get in Cape Canaveral. In exchange, there's a sequence at the end that involves astronauts escaping. There's like an escape process if there's a problem with the rocket launch, where they travel down zip lines to a distant point in like a sand pit far away from the rocket launch. And we saw this for real, and it was massive, and it was miles away, and it sat in the water. And we went to Robert Moses State Park and built a little berm between the dunes and a sand pit and a little bunker door, and that was it. Because at the end of the day, getting the big picture was more important than the mechanical details of this escape sequence. We created a version. I did a film called Across the Universe that was directed by Julie Taymor that was also set in the 60s, but it was a musical. And its narrative was created by sort of the arbitrary lyrical storylines from the song. So like, Lucy in the Sky with the Lucy was a character, and they made something trite up from, stringing together a bunch of Beatles songs. Ultimately, it was the visual spectacle of the music and the visual spectacle of the musical numbers that made the film worth watching, ostensibly. But within that, we staged, we recreated the March on Washington, the Detroit 8 Mile riots, we created the Bronx, the Vietnam protests along Fifth Avenue, and actually the Columbia Student Uprising, which Columbia didn't want to participate in. So we recreated the exterior facade of Hamilton Hall using the Museum of the City of New York on Fifth Avenue and 104th Street, shut down the street, and sort of put sod out in the middle of the night. If you watch it, it's sort of, you get it. But again, that's something very close to home. It's a version for a musical that's good enough to kind of get the message across. So whether history is treated meticulously or whether it's sort of brushed over, in the end, I think we have, this is the conclusion I've come to after thinking about this for a while, is I think we have an obligation to treat history respectfully at some level, because I believe in this day and age, the historical narrative that we create through pop culture is probably where the most of our general population gets its impression of history from. So I mean, that's a pretty substantial responsibility if you think about it, because outside of these walls and outside of New York City and outside of academia and we can look at many things in our current events that lead us to believe that maybe education isn't as widespread. But basically, at the most basic level, I think that it's safe to say, for better or for worse, that people get their impression of whether it's historical figures or historical events or what happened in Vietnam or any other war. It's like World War II is Saving Private Ryan. It's a very Vietnam is apocalypse now, but at every level, I do think that the pop culture we create is its own historical narrative that isn't always differentiated from actual history. So I leave you with that to think about and discuss. And if we want to talk about the Knick, we can do that. So what to talk about.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's safe to say that when I was a graduate student at Penn, I never thought I would write a Requiem. I never anticipated writing a libretto. Did I know what one was? Probably. But I certainly did not see it in my future. However, if I had taken the time to connect some dots and do a little bit of homework, I probably could have anticipated the state of affairs that led up to me writing the Requiem occurring. So I am an Africanist. My specialty is pre-colonial and West African history. And for some reason, in the early part of my career and in graduate school, I did not anticipate that as an early modern Africanist, I would spend as much of my career as I do talking about slavery, okay? Slavery and the transatlantic slave trade, and slavery on both sides of the Atlantic. And when you add to that my specialty in rice, rice in the upper Guinea coast of West Africa, and then captives taken from that region to South Carolina and Georgia and enslaved on rice plantations. There's a lot of slavery in that. I also knew, and these are the dots that I didn't connect until relatively recently in such a meaningful way. I also grew up knowing that my father's family was from Carleton County, South Carolina. And if anybody has ever been to Charleston, South Carolina, and driven south to Savannah, maybe, towards Savannah, driven down Highway 17, on both sides of Highway 17, you're driving over rice fields. And that's the area where my dad's from. So I knew there was rice in the family, and I'm an Africanist. I spend quite a bit of time actually lecturing in South Carolina because I write about rice farmers. And people are very interested because of these plantations in rice in South Carolina and Georgia. So it was on one of these trips where I had actually two conferences, one in Charleston, one in Columbia, on 2 different weeks, separated by a weekend, that I was minding my own business, and I thought, well, since I'm here between conferences, I can follow up on some research for my book project by day, and by evening I can do some genealogical work. It was on one of these trips that I encountered a family cemetery on one of the cemeteries that I was researching for my book project. And I'll just say that the cemetery was not in very good shape. From the graves that were marked, it was clear that many of the people in the cemetery had been enslaved. And I suspect now that all of the people in the cemetery are related to me. That's a couple years down the road. So it's one thing to teach about slavery and to research it and to lecture about it and to write about it. It's quite another thing to encounter it in a very tangible way in your own family. As I said, it was clear to me, you didn't have to be a historian to know that my ancestors were enslaved. It's another thing to see their burial places. It's another thing to learn more about the living conditions, the working conditions, the kinds of punishments, all of that they endured. And since that was 2013 that I encountered the cemetery, since then, as I work on my Gullah Geechee book and looking at rice, indigo, and Sea Island cotton plantations in the Low Country, I've encountered about, I think I'm up to 3 cemeteries. And there are a couple more that I haven't been able to confirm yet. So the names of my ancestors in these records that I'm studying, the headstones, if the graves are marked, in the cemeteries where I'm researching. The rice fields right next door was a pretty powerful thing for me to experience, and really caused me to think very differently about being a historian and about what do we do with our autobiography. It seems to me that for many of us, it's pretty unspoken why we do the work we do. And if you think about the numbers of hours that it takes to research and write a dissertation, the numbers of hours that it takes to turn that dissertation into a book, and now I'm daily confronted with the numbers of hours that it takes to start and complete a second book project. You know, these books take a lot of time. What is it that drives us to be so passionate about a topic for such a long period of time, and to be able to get up and work on it every day as if it were due tomorrow? I think that for many of us, there's an autobiographical story in there. It may drive how we choose a topic, which topic we choose. It certainly influences the kinds of questions that we ask of the sources, the kinds of sources that we even seek out, and how we analyze them and interrogate them. And so I was confronted with what to do with slaves in my family, and their graves and their names and the emotions that I felt as this academically trained historian who was taught that I wasn't really supposed to talk about that because then people would say that I was not objective. I did what I have done over the years. I like talking to artists. I really like talking to artists. They don't often have these hang-ups, right? At least not the artists I'm surrounding myself with. And I just feel like artists had a freedom of expression that at this moment I did not feel I had. So I did what I have done quite often in my career is I sought out artist friends. Friends who were working in the region, friends who I knew had confronted and brought their own autobiographies into their work, and it made their work so powerful. And you know, we got around to talking about this, and come to find out, of course, all of us had slaves in our family, but most of us had ancestors who were also enslaved on rice plantations. Who knew? So we decided to try to do something, to create a memorial for those enslaved, and thus was born the Requiem for Rice. My role in the project is, well, I'm writing the libretto, so I'm writing the text on which the Requiem is based. And I'm writing it from primary sources, primarily from autobiographies of former slaves that were either published in the 19th century or the WPA narratives, also from planners' documents. Of course, these are two incredibly different kinds of sources. I should throw travelers' accounts as well in there because there's some very interesting travelers' accounts that talk about the environment and the conditions in which the enslaved lived in the Low Country. And many of them are passing through from or on their way to other regions of the U.S. South. So they give interesting comparative perspectives about how the Low Country is different than other parts of the South, even other parts of what is today the state of South Carolina or Georgia. I think that one of the duties, and Jill Laporte spoke about it this earlier this afternoon, is a really rigorous analysis and use of these primary sources. So right now I'm tasked with developing a creative voice, and I'm exploring the freedom of what I do with the sources. But at the end of the day, the work is based on these primary sources. And my responsibility and my privilege is to bring the stories of these enslaved people and their descendants to life, but it is their story. It's been wonderful to collaborate with a group of artists, because if you can scroll to the bottom where the screen. Oh, okay, that's all right. As I said, I've never written a libretto before, never thought I would write a libretto before. But to collaborate with people who have done similar artistic projects, who have worked with all kinds of media, and then putting the multimedia together, who are visual artist Jonathan Green, who is phenomenal, filmmaker Julie Dash, again phenomenal, people like Lee Pringle, the founder of the Color of Music, Black Classical Musicians Orchestra. So we're all bringing our own expertise to the project and putting our expertise together to paint into this really broad and different canvas. It's phenomenal, and it's also incredibly humbling because we realize that each of us has skills that the others don't have. And just as much as I have often sought inspiration from artists, it's been interesting to learn that many of my artist friends seek inspiration from historians, so that they're reading our works, and those works are inspiring them to, create in their own media. So it's been a very wonderful cross-fertilization. The last thing I'll say is about our audience and our responsibilities to our audience. Because this is a requiem, it's an orchestral piece, typically the audience for symphony orchestra is relatively homogeneous. And yes, there is a play on words. It's an older audience, it's a wider audience, it's a more affluent audience. We're hoping to change that up a little bit. We're hoping to attract many more people of color to the Requiem. And in part, our collaboration with the Color of Music Black Classical Musicians Festival, which will debut the Requiem in 2017, and it will be played by the Color of Music Orchestra. The Color of Music has, in its history, it has successfully diversified the audience, so that about over 50% of its audience is people of color. And we're really hoping to capitalize on that. The subject matter is not easy subject matter. Most people, unlike me, do not sit around and think about slavery all day long. Because the piece is about South Carolina and Georgia, and that's an area where people think about this history more so than I think people say in New York do, or in Pittsburgh do, or in other parts of the country. But as a historian, I have the responsibility of intervening in the thoughts, in what they think they may know about this period in history. And the challenges are different, I would say, for white Americans. There's a lot of, if they think about it, there's often guilt that we have to deal with. People whose families may have held slaves, people who never held slaves, whose families never held slaves, but feel a sense of responsibility for this moment in history. African Americans often don't want to hear about enslavement either, for very different reasons. I think that many are dealing with a sense of shame. Many are also dealing, I think, with a sense of anger and helplessness about the state of our ancestors. And so thinking about parts of the story that will draw people in, despite the fact that the subject matter is not an easy subject matter. So we're hoping that this piece will actually be a point of reconciliation for a diverse audience to deal with a difficult story, and an opportunity to educate this diverse audience about both the tragedies and the triumphs of enslaved Africans, what they experienced as well as what they contributed. Thank you.
Hello. First, I just want to say thank you to Caroline and Sarah and Jim for having me. This is an amazing panel, so it's very impressive. And also, first I was going to introduce what we do at Who You Think You Are, but I thought I would ask, since we're talking about audience so much, has anyone ever seen the show here? Just kind of curious to get a sense of it. Okay, great. And also, before I sort of go into what we do and what our process is, I thought I would just give a quick intro to how I even came to the show, because I know there are a lot of graduate students and maybe recent grads here, and so you might relate to the story a little bit. I finished my degree at UCLA and was going out for interviews during the fall of 2008 and the fall of 2009. I don't know if anyone remembers anything big happening in the environment. So I was actually having job interviews canceled on the way to the interview because of hiring freezes. And so yeah, it was kind of a tough time, and so I hung around UCLA for a year working on a research project and doing some teaching. But the resources run out for recent grads, after a year or so, and so I was pretty destitute and thinking about moving back home with my mom, which is not something you think you're going to have to do as a PhD recent graduate. Put 6 years of your life into this thing. But then I got this sort of miraculous email from the UCLA listserv saying that this documentary series was looking for researchers from the department. Was anyone interested? I at first was like, am I allowed to do this? This isn't teaching, this isn't writing a manuscript, it's public history. I know that I was never really encouraged to do that. But if I look back on it now, I guess I shouldn't be that surprised that I did it and I loved it, because my advisor, after reading my dissertation, said to me, well, it's very narrative, and that's okay. Like that was somehow not what maybe he was going for, but he actually said, it's a good read. So I was like, ashamed. I was like, can I tell anybody that? But thanks to programs like this, I feel like I can tell people that and not feel horrible about it. But anyway, so in terms of what we do on the show and our process, I'll just give you a quick rundown of how it works, and I think you'll be able to see how kind of history it gets used and comes out of it. So the first thing we do is we call the celebrity who we're going to feature for 42 minutes and ask him or her all the questions about their ancestry. What do you know about your grandparents? What do you know about your great-grandparents? Sometimes it's a lot, sometimes it's nothing. We like the happy medium so that we have something to work off of, but not someone who knows everything, because then it makes it hard to find a story quickly. But yeah, so then we take whatever information they give us and we work in our office. I run the research staff there. There's a bunch of UCLA PhD students currently on my staff. I did that on purpose. So we do a bunch of the research ourselves through Ancestry.com and through digital archives. And then we work with a team of genealogists in Salt Lake City who are very just genealogy. They're not historians. They're not there to sort of provide context. They're there to sort of give us their amazing expertise about how to build sort of a life of a person's ancestry through genealogical records. And then we work with them and we take on the task of going to local archives that aren't digitized around the country, hiring our amazing local genealogists and researchers around the world. I mean, I just sent a huge Dropbox of images to my Italian researcher who's going to take up a big research task for me in the next couple of weeks. But yeah, we work all around the world and we pull any records we can on the family, sort of a big kind of pull at first if there is no immediate kind of story on a person. And then once we start to see something interesting popping up, maybe someone in Italy has an honorific, is kind of seems like they might be wealthy, or maybe there's an orphan and we want to know more about that, and then we kind of narrow our searches in on these kind of potential stories and look for things like letters and newspapers and more kind of textured documents that are not just kind of birth, marriage, death, and census records, although we use them heavily in our research. We couldn't do our jobs without them. So once we find a story that we think is compelling, my staff then contacts sort of world experts on a particular topic and get their take on not only analyzing the documents, but trying to help fill in the historical context. We employ many individuals on, I think someone in the earlier panel talked about using multiple historians just to look at one document. I mean, that is my life. It's constant. It's almost like when I was trained, it's if you don't know what that document is, I don't care if you can read it, I don't care if you think you know what it means. It does not get used until it's been sort of vetted by many, as many historians as we can get our hands on. And one of the things I'm glad that we're doing more and more is we're paying everybody for their help and their time. And then we try to get those historians who are the experts to then come on camera and present the material to the celebrity who is learning about his or her ancestry for the very first time, almost like a scavenger hunt. So, you'll start with sort of basic question, I don't know who my paternal grandmother was, but, she's a complete mystery to me. So then they go to an archive and sort of start the process with a genealogist, and then suddenly, 3 days later, they're in Portugal learning about something they had no idea was coming, that sort of thing. So we have historians on who present the material, not only because they're the experts and they can provide the audience with a very historically accurate portrayal of the documents, but then they're also there to just answer any questions from the celebrity, because they're always different questions. Some of them are questions we've anticipated, some of them are not, but we love to put them with someone who's comfortable to just kind of field questions and help take them on this very visceral journey in person, and they get to see those 17th century, even sometimes even older documents than that have happened in person, and really the history comes alive for them. But that's basically the process, and I think you can sort of get a sense of the historical rigor that goes into it. Part of what my job is, and this relates to the bigger audience question, is speaking of audiences that are homogenous, our show is on TLC, and they're a wonderful network for picking us up after being canceled by NBC. But their target audience is, I believe, women aged 30 to 55, and I think the sort of off-the-book kind of description is affluent and, for the most part, white. I mean, it just has to do with advertising. So one of the things that happens that becomes very frustrating for us and our staff, although we understand that advertising is what makes cable television work if it's not on public television, which is a completely different story, is we sort of have some things dictated to us. Like we might, if we come up with a story, if myself and my history PhDs write a treatment and it feels too dissertation-y, which is a word that was used just a couple of months ago about one of the treatments, we have to make it more accessible. And I think I'm allowed to share this, but at TLC there's sort of pitch. It's kind of embarrassing, but the pitch is that the story has to have a good ratio of OMG to heart. They tell us that publicly. They don't give us any confidentiality. But I mean, that's their audience, and they are sort of human interest stories on their channel, and so that basically then it's my job to kind of intervene and just be like, okay, we add a third trajectory, and it's called historical accuracy. You can't cut that out because we need it. So. But I would say that one of the things that's pretty amazing about working on the show is that we've trained up our executives. They probably in the beginning, a lot of them, not all of them, many people, are very supportive of intellectual endeavors. But they really respect us now, really trust us, and trust that when we tell them, you can't phrase it this way because it's too speculative, or you're just going too far off the rails with this. We absolutely need to bring this back. And we don't like to portray on camera that a leap could have been made, without this sort of connective tissue, like one document to the next. There has to be a historical and genealogically logical reason why we're going from one step to the other. And all the time, because of time constraints, we shoot these for 10 days, and we only have 42 minutes to present it on television. And of course, the network executive is going to want to take the, oh my gosh, I can't believe this moment, and then show it, for longer, and then cut back on the, well, this is how we got there moment. And so now it's been my job, along with one of the other co-VPs on the show, to really sort of, fact check that and really lay down the law when it's going too far in that direction. And I will say that we also do 3 rounds of fact checking. At the end of the process, we get several cuts of an episode, and at each point, it goes through a rigorous fact check of the researcher who was the first person working on it, and myself as a supervisor. And then even if there are tidbits where we're like, okay, we didn't envision it that way, but it's cut this way, let me run it by the historian who's in the scene and say, how do you feel about this portrayal? And sometimes they say, I don't think that really is how I would present it, or it's not historically accurate enough in my case. And so we have to tell our editors that, and We've got a good relationship with them now, and they understand that we absolutely wouldn't do it if we didn't feel like we had to. We're not just being pains. But yeah, it goes through that process, 3 times, and so hopefully, that's definitely going to reach the level of rigor that we're hoping for. So that's basically how the process is. Just trying to think, we're kind of running low on time, aren't we? Yeah, and I would just say then, in terms of audience, we do reach generally an episode has 1.5 million viewers, right? So that sounds like a lot of people, and that's great. It is a small cable show, so it's not so many. But we do, we work with celebrities, and celebrities have audiences, and then these things sort of get, sort of disseminated to the public through multiple different, lots of the celebrities, Twitter, through their experience and stuff like that. So hopefully we're reaching a lot of people. But I would just say, to the point earlier that Professor Schama said, it's a very insular world in the documentary TV world. Now, I work for a program on TLC, so it's very different from all the PBS programs. And it's very different in the sense that there are no others. It's the only show kind of like it on cable. I mean, there are other shows that portray history, but this kind of very rigorous process and thinking about what my next job will be, it's precarious. There aren't a lot of shows where I could really use my PhD training, all my archive field work, all the, the time I put into sort of knowing how to contact people to get what I need on the ground and all of that. There just aren't a lot of shows where I'll be able to do what I'm doing now, forever. So I think that we just need to get more historians into executive positions so that they can then make more, in development, honestly, make more programming like it so that we can employ more historians. It's kind of an ongoing snowball effect, hopefully. But, yeah.
Can I have a quickie before I close? I'd love to hear from you all. 2 things I want to say is, one is that history really is a house of many, many different mansions. I mean, arguably the most successful projection of history, we'll all argue about whether it is history or not. It is in a way. It's Hamilton. And how many of you have been there? But one of the most amazing things about Hamilton is the audience, which is a little cult obsessed. But they go back to Ron Chernow, bits of Ron Chernow, and in the sense in which it made me think really of, well, how did 16th century English audiences get their history? They didn't get it directly, many of them, from Hollinger. They got it from Shakespeare history plays. Shakespeare history plays, particularly when he was in Shoreditch, that side of the river. I mean, he didn't lose an audience, but where he and Burbage and the rest of them were there were packed, and they were ordinary people. There were groundlings, there were drape porters and tanners and weavers and carpenters, and it cost very much. And one all thinks, well, that was fantasy history, the famous Hunchback. Actually, when we discovered in the Leicester car park, contrary to all the passion of Ricardians, who said it's a filthy Tudor conspiracy concocted by Thomas More, he was straight as a rock. This fantastic scoliotic monster actually came out of the grave. So Shakespeare knew what he was doing. And I would say the only second point I want to make is that you've all been incredibly kosher and admirable about the rigorousness of accuracy, and that absolutely is as it should be. What I try and get my students, whether they're writing, and I hope there's some of you here, what I would say, a message from me, for what it's worth, is that while you're doing your dissertations and while you're doing your graduate work, if you do have an imaginative, and I don't mean fictitious, but I do mean imaginative yen to work up the historical project in the very moving way Edda was describing, or in any other way, you should, make Saturday, fence Saturday around to work on that imaginative project. And sometimes, what I tell them is that I'm reminded of one of the great books about history, written by the philosopher R.H. Collingwood in Oxford, called The Idea of History. And Collingwood described the work of a historian as an imaginative caravan. I forced her to read it. And it is kind of crazy, idealist, philosophical statement. But what he was asking for was a kind of total immersion in sources, in the language of the moment, the costume, the diet, the sort of music of life at that particular moment, without any illusion that you'd kind of walk through a magic curtain and found yourself in the place, but that you weren't entirely alien to it either. And once you do that, then really, the game is on, I think. And very often, when you let the voices speak, you can do it in film, the kind of films I make, with amazingly economic materials. I always remember the director I was working with on the Elizabeth Mary Queen of Scots program in the history of Britain. The moment was when Mary Queen of Scots was escaping Scotland, flinging herself on what she foolishly imagined to be the hospitality of Elizabeth I. And we wanted her, her hair was cropped, she was dressed in man's clothes, she was running for her life, loosely speaking, she was in a boat, and she was crossing the Solway Firth. Now, we were using the occasional reenactment. I hated a lot of them, men with stick-on whiskers, really. And I said to Claire, all we want, and was actually a tracking shot alongside the waves. You saw actually nothing except waves for about a minute and a half of a continuous tracking shot. A minute and a half is like an eon in television and film time, God knows. And what you heard was an account of somebody who was with her, of her shorn and bruised and dirty and sitting in the boat, and no more everybody. That actually, part of the job of the imaginative historian is to have your reader or your viewer or your listener complete the historical engagement for you.
We have time for just a couple of quick questions. Yeah.
Hi. My question for Professor Fields-Black. How do you approach your work on the Gullah Geechee differently than you approach the work on Requiem for Vice? Considering that, this is a community that's still living, obviously under threat in various ways, but I'm thinking not only just intellectually, but like your effective relationship to the work that you're doing there. And how does that lead you into new ways of asking questions and new ways of answering them? So if you could maybe just, I know it's a big question, but I'm just curious.
It is a big question, but I appreciate it. First of all, many of the sources that I'm using are the same, and I feel as if the Requiem has given me an opportunity to focus on writing in ways that I haven't done before, as an academic historian, and to really focus on how I'm telling the story. I think that changes the way that I'm writing the Gullah Geechee history. It's interesting. The Gullah Geechee communities are, as you said, under threat, and the history is quite political. I've tried really hard not to get involved in those controversies, but to really read the sources and follow the sources where they lead. So my reading of history is quite different than the contemporary construction of the Gullah Geechee. At the same time, I try to be very respectful for people who are invested in that contemporary identity, but to show, if anything, what are the historical roots of it? Where does it come from? That we cannot project it back into, I would say, beyond the early 20th century, maybe even the mid-20th century. But what are the historical roots of this particular group of people? And how, if we go back to, say, the 18th century, how do we see, how does it develop over time? And how is it incredibly diverse in that period, whereas today we think of it as almost homogenous. So it's a very different reading. It seeks to be a very respectful reading, but also historically rigorous in that I'm going to follow those sources and try as hard to tell the story as well as I possibly can, and to write it as fluidly and dramatically and narratively as I